you're a man in the Western world that practices a lot of Eastern things and ties it all together, looks at things from a macroscopic and microscopic way. And I love that. But just to give a little bit of background and hear a little bit of your story, how'd you get into all this? How'd you become classically trained in Chinese medicine? What led you into all this?
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm happy to be here. So, and yeah, I practice Chinese medicine with a Taoist slant. And, I got into Chinese medicine, interested in this sort of cultivational journey. I just found the idea of improving oneself very fascinating. And it seemed as though that had been deeply explored in the East. And I started in martial arts. So I sort of began in this sort of physical realm of things, of just learning to use my body in different ways with breathing exercises and physical exercises. But then also got exposed to meditation and the concept of right, wrong, good, bad, appropriate, inappropriate, sort of duality concepts. And it made sense to me. It just really kind of drew me in. And I didn't conceive of pursuing it as a career. I worked as a translator for a number of years, worked in business, hated sitting behind a desk all day. And I was reading a book on Chinese medicine because I was interested in it. And a friend of mine was just like, why don't you go to school for Chinese medicine? And it was like somebody had smacked me upside the head. And I just realized like, oh, duh, that's what I should be doing. And so I worked for a little longer to save up some money, went back to grad school, and just really haven't looked back. And then there is the sort of modern TCM, which is what is most acupuncture. It's called traditional Chinese medicine, although TCM is really post-Mao. So it's not traditional. It's post-communist revolution synthesized Chinese medicine, where Mao brought many of the best doctors together from around the country, looked to see commonalities and understandings of the medicine, and then synthesized a standard for the entire country from that, getting rid of a lot and keeping a certain amount.
So it's really modernized traditional medicine in a way, right?
Exactly. It is very much so. And his model in that was Western medicine. So everything is described in these sort of quasi-biomedical terminology, which is not the language of classical Chinese medicine, which would have been usually considered, let's say, pre-Song dynasty or it's really like, basically, the Chinese medicine has gone through iterations because it is so old. And what was practiced before the Song dynasty, which would be, let's say, roughly 900 to 1200 period, is different than what was practiced after it. And then it also went through other iterations as well with different schools of thought. But Mao basically took and created a new synthesis, which became TCM. And that's what I first learned. But then I got exposed to a Taoist teacher who is actually back in Manhattan or in Queens, and began studying with him and had access to more of the classical approach. And that really took me even deeper and resonated with me that much more. It was just that much richer in terms of how it looked at the integration of the physical journey, the emotional journey, the spiritual journey, and that whole experience was really sort of like just mind-opening of like, oh, this really makes sense. This really is kind of where human potentiality is at, and just drew me in. And rather than learning Taoism from the perspective of studying a religious text and doing religious rituals and doing all of these sort of formal things, I learned Taoism via the medicine. So I learned about Taoism via disease and the prevention of disease or the treatment of disease, rather than just learning how to burn incense and do chants or do that sort of stuff, which was really my interest. It was about the sort of human to human journey and how can we as humans be healthier physically, emotionally, spiritually, And that's the part of Taoism that just is like the nectar to me. It's the part that really kind of gets me fascinated in terms of the human journey.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I always understood, and I'm sure most people saw traditional or classical Chinese medicine as the whole sum of Chinese ancient, everything that came, acupuncture, understanding all of that was lumped together. And you're saying that's not really the case. It's westernized quite a bit. And there is a number of different types of approaches as far back as you could go, really, in Chinese medicine that would differ quite a bit. So from Taoism to TCM, what is the big differentiating factors that you would see if you went to a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner versus a Taoist practitioner?
Well, I mean, I think, one thing traditional Chinese medicine, the sort of modernized version, still does include a lot of classical stuff. But what the communists did is to really try to separate out the emotional component of things. They focused on things in terms of very somatic, cut and dry, leaving the psychology aside, or leaving the sort of, not just the psychology, because they did come up with treatments for anxiety, for depression, for those sorts of things. But the emotional journey of the human, as a human, that part was largely removed. And so it was very cut and dry, like this is a human having this experience of anxiety, but not the sort of deeper introspection of like, well, how did you get there? How did you become you to have anxiety? Because you and I might have been exposed to the same exact event, but we're going to experience it differently. And that facet of removing that is one of the bigger differences. It's sort of removing the psycho-spiritual journey of a human as a factor in medicine, where Taoism, you just can't remove it because that's what it's about.
Yeah, and it seems that that's a issue or a problem, I could say, across the board in medicine. Meaning, you look at conventional medicine, and there are a number of things and iterations to it as well, where we've gotten away further and further from that psycho-emotional, you as a spiritual being and just a body piece. So as we've modernized, we've kind of broken you down into pieces, specialized in this piece, and that's it. So it seems that, and that's not just conventional. If you look at westernized, I've even seen Ayurvedic practitioners that are modernizing and forgetting some pieces of the past.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem because we're losing this wisdom of thousands of years.